Hi, this is Eric Keller for Otoy. In this video, I'm going to talk about setting up image-based lighting using Octane for Maya. So I'm using my little dragonfly scene here, and I have image-based lighting set up already, which is creating this kind of blue skylight in the background. I also have an area light, which is casting some of the light on the front of the dragonfly here, which is creating some of these highlights. Let's start by deleting all the lights in the scene. So I'm going to go in here to the outliner, select my Octane Sun Sky Transform, hit delete, and then also delete my area light. And if I just render the scene with no lights, I'm not going to get a black background. I'm actually going to get a white background. So white is kind of the default background color. And when we render, it will be seen kind of casting light into the scene. It looks kind of neat. But it's not what we're going for. What we want to do next is actually create our sun sky node. So we'll go to the Octane render shelf, and I'm going to click on this little icon right here, which creates our sun sky environment. I'm going to switch to the perspective view, and you can see the sun sky environment is represented by this sphere. So one thing I like to do is I like to enlarge the sphere just so it's in the background, so I don't have it interfering with the other objects I'm working with. So I'm just going to select the radius in the scene, and this option is found in the Octane Sun Sky attributes in the attribute editor. I'll set this to 100. I also want to set the type to texture environment as opposed to daylight environment. So daylight environment uses kind of procedural method or settings down here in order to create the lighting. We want to use a texture. So stick to texture environment. The other thing I like to do, because it can get a little bit annoying if the sun sky is in the background, sometimes when you're just clicking in Maya, you can select it by accident, and that can kind of get on your nerves. So I'm going to go to the channel box, choose layers, create layer from selected. I have the sun sky selected right now, so I'll choose create layer from selected. Let's name this sun sky underscore DL for display layer. Choose save, and then set the mode to R for reference. And that means that when I click in the background here, I'm not selecting it by accident. I can still select it in the outliner though. So let's select it and go into the attribute editor for the sun sky node again. And let's really quickly just do another test render just to see what it looks like so far. So here's with no texture environment in the background or no sun sky transform node. I'm going to do another IPR render. What we'll see, it's going to be similar, but it's going to be kind of a dull gray. So if we look in the texture environment, texture is set to 1, meaning white. Power is set to 0.3, so it's a fairly low power. If I set this up to 1, we're going to see it kind of looks like before. We have a white environment. So what we need to do now is create a texture node and connect it to this texture slot in the sun sky node. So to get a texture, we need a spherically mapped HDR. And you can get these in a lot of different places online. One place I like to go to get HDRs, especially when I'm just kind of testing things out, is the www.hdrlabs.com website /SIBL/archive.html. There's lots of great environments that you can download for free and plug into your scene and use while you're working on your lighting. So I've downloaded the Mono Lake B folder, and I put it in my source images folder. So let's click on the icon next to texture here to open up the create render node window, and I'll choose Octane image texture. I'll click on this folder right here in the texture node, and I'm going to find my texture. So I have a folder called Mono Lake B, and the one that I want to use is the Mono Lake B underscore ref.hdr. Let's use that. And you can see it looks a little bit funky because it's at a weird angle, and it's also fairly low in terms of power. So I'm going to go back up to the sun sky environment, and let's set the power to 3. So it's going to brighten things up considerably. And what we're seeing right here is in the image, there's kind of a little bit of a rock right here, and it's kind of like halfway in our view here, which is not making for a very nice composition. So how do we fix this? What we need to do is we actually need to rotate that Octane Sun Sky Transform node. And so one way to do this is to rotate the actual texture on it. So I'm going to go to the Sun Sky attributes, click next to texture. You can see here's our image texture. And I'm going to click on projection and choose the spherical projection node. So this just ensures that the image is spherically mapped to our sun sky environment. Doesn't look that much different yet, but we do have a new node now, and it has a slot for transform. So I'll click on this and I'm going to choose, we can choose transform 3D, or you could try and choose rotation transform, whatever you think is most appropriate. Transform 3D has rotation, scale, and transformation. So for instance, if I wanted to pump this up a little bit in space, I could type in 1 for the Y translate, and you can see that moves the whole image up. I said 0.1, moves it up just a little bit, 0.2, so you can see it's just kind of moving it up there. So if I want to rotate this, I can go into the Y channel for rotation. If I type in 90, you can see that that's going to rotate the image. Let's go to the camera node here, and I'm going to go down to the camera settings, and I'm going to set aperture to 0 just so we can see the image a little bit better. So I'll go to Octane camera, and in this particular scene I have set the thin lens camera aperture to 50 to create the depth of field blurring. Let's set this down to 0, so now we can see the background very clearly. We can see it reflected in this plane that represents our water. And we can see it's casting light in the scene. So now we have this light. We can adjust the power to pump it up a little bit more. At a certain point, what we really need to do is add additional lights in the scene other than just the sun sky transform. But you can see how adjusting the power can make it brighter. Now, one thing that I like to do, because if you're constantly going to this projection node and the transform node and typing in values for the rotation, it can get a little bit tedious. So a trick you can do is to create something you can use as an interactive control in the scene to rotate the texture. So in this case, let's just create a locator. So I'll choose create locator. Let's name the locator environment rotation. I'm going to choose Windows General Editor, Connection Editor. You could also use the Node Editor. I'll just use the Connection Editor because it's very straightforward. Select my environment rotation locator and choose Reload Left. And then I'm going to go to the Octane Sun and Sky, and let's traverse the nodes so that we can get to that Transform 3D node. And I'll choose Select, so it's now selected. And I'll choose Reload Right, so now it's loaded here into the Connection Editor. And now what I can do is I can scroll down on the left side, find my my rotate channels. Here they are, rotate. And I will just connect rotate X to rotate X, rotate Y to rotate Y, rotate Z to rotate Z. And I'll close this, and now if I select my rotation node here and go into the channel box, I can actually rotate it around by selecting rotate Y, middle mouse dragging, or just drag right here. But let's see what effect this has on the actual scene. So let's do another IPR render. And now I can middle mouse button drag this, and you can see now I can interactively rotate it in the scene, which makes it a lot easier to kind of position. Now the earlier version of the scene, instead of using this particular image, I was using the blurred out version. So meaning if I go to the attribute editor, and let's find that image node, I'll click on this folder. So here I'm using the monolakebref.htr, which is a nice clear version of the image. But if I click on this and go to monolakeb, there's another one called monolakeb-environment.htr, and this is kind of a blurred out version, which I kind of like because it creates a nice soft looking light. So you can see then, and also that background is not necessarily so overwhelming in terms of detail. So it just looks kind of nicer in my opinion. So there you go. That's the basics of working with image-based lighting using Octane for Maya.